Sometimes the system doesn't break because of chaos. It breaks because it picked the wrong man to control. The early morning rush at Los Angeles International Airport moved like a living current of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and hurried footsteps. But at Gate B12, that rhythm fractured into something colder and more controlled. A black man stood near the secondary security checkpoint, calm posture, neutral expression, hands relaxed at his sides while TSA officers reviewed his identification for a second time. His name was Marcus Hale. He wore a simple dark jacket, civilian clothing that gave no immediate indication of rank or background. To most eyes, he blended into the thousands of travelers passing through the terminal. But something about his stillness made him stand out in a way that was difficult to explain. Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped forward with a practiced sense of authority, his tone firm but performative, as if the presence of control itself mattered more than the situation in front of him. He glanced at Marcus's documents, then at Marcus himself, then back at the documents again, narrowing his eyes slightly as if searching for inconsistencies that did not exist. "Sir, step aside for additional verification," he said, already signaling to another officer without waiting for a response. Marcus did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply complied, moving one step to the side of the queue as travelers behind him slowed, sensing something unfolding that had nothing to do with normal procedure. Within moments, two more officers approached, creating a loose semicircle around him. The explanation shifted quickly from routine verification to suspicion, though no clear reason was given. Marcus remained composed, his eyes scanning the environment with quiet awareness, noting every angle, every officer position, every camera placement without reacting outwardly. Officer Whitmore interpreted that silence as defiance. "You understand we have protocols here," he said, voice slightly louder now, enough for nearby passengers to hear. A few heads turned. Phones subtly lifted. The moment was no longer private. Marcus responded calmly, his voice steady and controlled. "I understand your protocols." That was all he said. The simplicity of it seemed to frustrate Whitmore more than resistance would have. Another officer leaned in, whispering something about non-cooperation and possible red flags, terms that carried weight in airport security environments regardless of evidence. Marcus was instructed to place his hands behind his back. There was no struggle, no protest. The cuffs clicked into place with mechanical finality. A ripple moved through the nearby crowd, confusion mixing with curiosity, as passengers tried to understand what had escalated so quickly. Marcus looked toward the main terminal screens for a brief moment, then back at the officers. His expression did not change. Officer Whitmore stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, attempting to assert dominance through proximity. "You have the right to explain yourself at the station," he said. Marcus nodded once. Then he spoke a sentence that shifted the air around them in a way no one fully recognized at first. "Before we proceed further, I will need to make one phone call." There was a brief pause. A short laugh from one officer nearby. Whitmore shook his head slightly, dismissing it immediately. "You can make calls later." Marcus did not argue again. He simply repeated, calmly and without emotion, "One call is enough." That moment, small as it appeared, would become the point where everything began to move in a direction none of them were prepared for. The small area behind the security checkpoint suddenly felt like the center of a storm, with Marcus Hale standing motionless as officers conferred in hurried whispers, their expressions tense, brows furrowed, and hands hovering over radios as if summoning decisions that could not yet be made. He remained composed, eyes calm, scanning the surroundings while a nearby terminal display flickered news headlines, passengers' luggage rolling past, some glancing curiously, others filming on their phones, unaware that the man in handcuffs was not just a traveler but a highly trained Navy SEAL with access to sensitive channels, quietly calculating every angle, noting officer positioning and doorways, all without alerting anyone to his extraordinary experience. Officer Daniel Whitmore, feeling pressure to justify the heightened attention, gestured for a junior officer to check Marcus's personal items again, flipping through a small carry-on while Marcus watched silently, his posture controlled, his breathing steady, the silent confidence in his demeanor contrasting sharply with the bustling anxiety around them. The younger officer's eyes darted nervously as he returned, mumbling about inconsistencies that were purely imagined, and Whitmore's frustration grew as he struggled to interpret Marcus's quiet observance as potential threat. Marcus's phone, still in his pocket, became the focal point of subtle tension, the thought of one phone call to the Pentagon weighing heavier than anyone realized, signaling that the balance of control could shift with a single calm action. Passengers' murmurs grew as some began recording, their cameras capturing snippets of the encounter while security attempted to maintain order, the surrounding crowd unaware of the strategic patience of the man in handcuffs, whose disciplined posture hinted at untold skill and presence of mind, an unspoken command that rippled through the officers, challenging their assumptions without a single word. Marcus allowed the officers to continue their performative authority, never reacting impulsively, his face a mask of courteous compliance, yet every movement and glance calculated, reflecting years of tactical training, as he internally prepared the necessary steps to make that one critical call, ensuring that the situation could be resolved efficiently and decisively once he had communicated with the right channels, all while maintaining the calm, imperturbable demeanor that had carried him through countless high-stakes missions. The room seemed to contract around him, every officer's step and gesture amplified by tension, and yet Marcus's presence remained unshakable, quiet testament to discipline and mastery, silently conveying that the unfolding events would soon shift dramatically once he took action, leaving no room for error, his awareness and foresight a silent counterbalance to the rushed judgments of those surrounding him, holding the scene in suspense as each second stretched, and the airport's rhythm continued outside the small charged area. Marcus Hale shifted slightly as the officers debated among themselves, their voices a low murmur that barely carried over the airport announcements. Every passenger in the vicinity seemed to sense tension, some craning their necks to see the man in handcuffs who remained astonishingly composed, eyes scanning methodically, noting the positions of each officer and the exits with a tactical precision that came naturally after years of Navy SEAL training. His phone remained in his pocket, the device a silent link to channels that could change the course of the entire situation, and he subtly flexed his fingers, feeling the weight of the moment as every step and glance around him seemed amplified, each gesture of authority from the officers measured and deliberate, yet oblivious to the quiet power they faced. Officer Whitmore kept glancing at Marcus, unsure whether his calm was confidence or calculation, and he ordered another agent to verify identification once more, while Marcus followed each movement silently, offering polite nods, maintaining a posture that radiated control without aggression, the very image of disciplined patience that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy of the surrounding airport personnel. As the junior officer carefully unfolded Marcus's documents, Marcus's eyes briefly met theirs, a steady, unblinking gaze that communicated awareness and composure, an invisible tension threading through the group as the SEAL's mere presence seemed to command a silent respect, even if unrecognized by those untrained in subtle authority. The crowd grew slightly more attentive, whispers spreading about the unusual detainment of a seemingly ordinary traveler. Yet Marcus did not flinch, did not protest, and did not betray his next move, understanding fully that maintaining outward compliance while internally calculating the precise moment to act was crucial for both clarity and control. He mentally rehearsed the call he would soon place, envisioning the precise words and order in which they would be delivered, aware that this single action could instantly dismantle misconceptions and re-establish command, and he noted every potential interruption, every angle, ready to adapt without revealing the extent of his capabilities. The subtle clatter of luggage wheels on tile, the muted hum of escalators, the distant voices of security announcements, all these details registered in Marcus's mind as he held himself steady, a figure of concentrated focus amid chaos. And even as he allowed the officers to continue their formalities, he remained the silent orchestrator, understanding that patience was as powerful as any visible act of strength, every second stretching with deliberate significance, the scene a study in calm authority versus uncertain enforcement, and every moment brought him closer to taking the decisive, controlled action that would resolve the tension entirely in his favor. The tension at the airport checkpoint deepened as Marcus Hale remained seated in handcuffs, surrounded by officers who were still attempting to justify their escalating response, unaware that every additional second only reinforced the growing imbalance between perception and reality. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood slightly apart, speaking into his radio in short, clipped phrases, trying to maintain procedural control, but his posture now carried a subtle stiffness that betrayed uncertainty, as If he was beginning to sense that the situation had moved beyond routine enforcement and into something he no longer fully understood, Marcus, meanwhile, remained completely still, his attention divided between the physical environment and the internal precision of timing, each passing announcement over the airport speakers marking another moment closer to his intended action, while his calm expression remained unchanged, giving no indication of urgency or concern. Passengers nearby continued to observe, some discreetly filming, others whispering, as the scene developed into something that no longer resembled a standard security procedure, but instead carried the weight of unresolved authority conflict. A senior airport supervisor arrived and briefly conferred with Whitmore, glancing at Marcus's documentation, their expressions shifting subtly as inconsistencies in the situation began to surface, though none of them yet had the full picture to interpret what they were seeing. Marcus's phone, still secured but accessible, represented a silent pivot point in the unfolding event, and he adjusted his posture slightly, signaling readiness without initiating action. His discipline evident in the way he maintained absolute composure under scrutiny. Whitmore, attempting to regain control of the narrative, reiterated the justification for detention, but his voice lacked the earlier certainty, now sounding procedural rather than authoritative, as if he was relying more on protocol than conviction. The surrounding officers exchanged brief glances, their confidence gradually eroding as Marcus's continued silence and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the rising tension in their own ranks. Overhead lights reflected off polished airport surfaces, casting a sterile brightness over the scene that only heightened the sense of exposure and observation, as if every movement was being recorded not just by cameras but by the collective attention of everyone present. Marcus remained the still center of the situation, neither resisting nor yielding emotionally, embodying a controlled presence that suggested depth far beyond what had been assumed about him, and though no one yet fully understood the implications of his next action, the environment itself seemed to tighten around the moment, signaling that a critical shift was imminent and unavoidable. Marcus Hale's calm, unwavering demeanor began to shift the atmosphere in the airport terminal as officers remained uncertain how to proceed, their voices slightly raised but lacking the previous decisiveness, each glance toward him carrying hesitation as the realization grew that their assumptions about control were flawed. Whitmore, still attempting to maintain authority, gestured toward Marcus's phone with subtle urgency, signaling to colleagues while keeping his own composure, but his usual air of command was tempered by the awareness that the situation had entered uncharted territory. And even the passengers observing quietly sensed the tension change from procedural to unpredictable, as whispers spread and eyes followed every movement, creating a subtle, collective pressure that weighed on everyone present. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, aligning his body with careful precision, not in resistance but in readiness, eyes scanning the officers with measured attention, revealing both situational awareness and calm strategic thinking, while his breathing remained controlled and steady, each inhale and exhale reinforcing the impression of discipline honed through extensive training, signaling to any observer that any action would be deliberate and exact, nothing left to chance. The surrounding officers, caught between protocol and instinct, exchanged brief, uncertain glances, aware that their typical procedures were insufficient to manage the unfolding scenario, their hesitation highlighting the gap between expectation and reality, and each second stretched as Marcus's stillness became the central point around which every other reaction orbited, creating a dynamic in which anticipation, observation, and tension coexisted, heightening the suspense and engagement of the scene. Airport staff, drawn into the tension, began subtle movements of their own, repositioning slightly to maintain distance yet remain observant, their body language adding to the silent orchestration of a scenario that had evolved from routine security check to a high-stakes demonstration of control, presence, and measured response, and the ambient noise of announcements, rolling luggage, and distant chatter layered over the unfolding event, amplifying the sense of immediacy and importance, as if the very environment recognized the pivotal moment in progress. Marcus's eyes shifted briefly toward the phone again, the instrument of potential disruption and communication with higher authority, signaling readiness without alarm, a controlled anticipation that suggested not only personal preparation but the inevitability of a consequential action. His calm and commanding presence radiating outward and affecting all nearby, subtly transforming the perception of power within the space, reinforcing the understanding that the forthcoming interaction would not only alter immediate circumstances, but also ripple through the broader system in ways that could not be ignored, making the scene charged with expectation, authority, and the quiet assertion of strategic intelligence. The airport checkpoint area had now fully shifted from a routine security interaction into a tense standoff of perception versus reality, as Marcus Hale remained seated in controlled stillness, his wrists restrained but his presence unbroken, while Officer Daniel Whitmore stood a few feet away trying to maintain procedural dominance despite the growing uncertainty in his expression. Every officer on scene had begun to feel it, even if none would admit it openly, that the situation was no longer following a predictable path, as Marcus's calm silence carried a weight that contrasted sharply with their escalating discomfort, creating a psychological imbalance that subtly eroded confidence across the group. Passengers in the surrounding terminal had become fully engaged observers, some pretending not to watch while others openly recorded, their attention fixed on the man who had been detained but not diminished, whose posture remained steady, shoulders relaxed, eyes focused, and breathing measured, as if the entire environment was simply a background variable in a controlled operation rather than a threat. Whitmore attempted once again to assert authority by speaking into his radio, requesting confirmation and backup validation of protocol status, but his tone now carried a noticeable hesitation, as though each word required additional justification rather than flowing from certainty, and nearby officers exchanged brief glances that revealed the growing awareness that standard procedures were insufficient to interpret what they were witnessing. Marcus, still silent, subtly adjusted his seated position, not in resistance but in alignment, as if preparing for a predetermined sequence rather than reacting to an unpredictable one. And that subtle shift drew the attention of a senior airport supervisor who had arrived moments earlier, now studying the scene with increased seriousness, recognizing that the calm individual in restraints was not behaving like a typical detainee. The environment itself seemed to narrow in focus, with overhead announcements fading into background noise and the movement of travelers becoming secondary to the concentrated stillness at the checkpoint, where every second added pressure to an already fragile equilibrium. Whitmore, sensing the shift but unable to fully define it, tightened his stance and gestured toward Marcus's phone. Again, but even that gesture lacked conviction, as if authority was being performed rather than exercised, and Marcus's continued silence only amplified the imbalance, reinforcing the sense that control of the situation was no longer firmly in any officer's hands. The tension reached a sustained peak of anticipation, not through action but through restraint, as all present unconsciously waited for a single decision point that had not yet arrived, unaware that the calm man at the center of the scene was already positioned to change the entire structure of authority with one deliberate and precisely timed communication. Marcus Hale's fingers hovered over the phone, the room thick with tension as he prepared to dial a number that could change everything. The officers surrounding him shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, unsure whether to intervene or wait, their standard procedures offering no guidance for a situation that defied all normal expectations, and Marcus's calm, deliberate demeanor only amplified the uncertainty in the air, highlighting a quiet confidence that contrasted with the officers' mounting hesitation. The terminal lights reflected off the polished floor, casting elongated shadows across the faces of onlookers whose curiosity was piqued by the unusual scene, and a subtle murmur began among the gathered crowd as travelers sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes, a moment of anticipation that seemed to suspend time itself. Officer Whitmore attempted to maintain authority, raising his hand in a restrained gesture, but his voice wavered as he repeated instructions to remain seated. Yet Marcus's focus remained unbroken, his eyes scanning the environment calmly, noting the angles and positions of every person, every object, as if calculating the optimal moment for action, while the officers began to realize that the man in custody was not merely compliant but fully aware and in control of the unfolding narrative. Nearby security cameras captured every subtle movement, recording not only the visual details but the palpable tension that emanated from Marcus, whose body language communicated patience, precision, and anticipation, commanding attention without a single aggressive motion, and the surrounding personnel found themselves questioning their understanding of authority and the dynamics of power, sensing that the usual assumptions about control no longer applied. Whispers traveled through the crowd, speculating on Marcus's identity and the nature of his presence, yet he remained composed, the calm before an inevitable shift, the anticipation building like a coiled spring, and every eye followed. The slight movement of his hand reaching for the phone, the beginning of a sequence that promised to alter the trajectory of everyone present. Marcus took a slow breath, his gaze steady, signaling a controlled confidence that contrasted sharply with the tension around him, while Officer Whitmore's posture stiffened, realizing that the next actions would not be negotiable and that Marcus held the power to define the terms of engagement, transforming the seemingly ordinary checkpoint into a moment of strategic revelation, every second stretching as the terminal awaited the next decisive move, where the authority and foresight of the Black Navy SEAL would soon become undeniable and reshape the understanding of the entire situation. The atmosphere at the airport checkpoint reached a critical point of suspended motion as Marcus Hale finally brought his hand closer to the phone, the entire space seemingly narrowing in focus around that single anticipated action, while officers watched with increasing uncertainty, their earlier confidence replaced by a careful, uneasy attention that reflected their inability to predict what would follow. Officer Whitmore stood rigid, his posture signaling authority but his expression betraying hesitation, as he realized that the situation had moved far beyond standard procedural control and into a domain where external forces might soon override local command structures. Marcus remained composed, his movements slow and deliberate, not rushed or reactive, embodying a level of discipline that made every second feel intentional, as though he was fully aware of the weight carried by the action he was about to take and the consequences it would trigger across multiple layers of authority. Passengers nearby had stopped pretending not to watch, many openly observing, some recording, sensing instinctively that something significant was about to unfold, and the airport environment itself seemed to quiet in contrast to the tension at Gate B12, as if the surrounding noise had been pushed further away by the intensity of the moment. Marcus's gaze briefly lifted, scanning the officers one final time, not in defiance but in acknowledgement, as though confirming that every necessary condition had been met before proceeding, and this subtle pause only deepened the psychological pressure in the space, causing even experienced security personnel to exchange uncertain glances. Whitmore attempted once more to assert procedural authority, raising his voice slightly to instruct Marcus not to proceed without authorization, but his words lacked conviction, sounding more like an obligation than a command, revealing that control of the situation had already begun to slip beyond his influence. Marcus then finally pressed a single key on his phone, initiating a secure connection that was not immediately visible to those present but carried implications far beyond the airport terminal, and in that instant, the atmosphere shifted in a way that was not loud or dramatic but profoundly structural, as if a hidden system had been activated. The officers waited, unsure of what they had just witnessed, expecting perhaps a routine call, but Marcus's calm expression suggested otherwise, indicating that what had been triggered was not local communication but a chain of authority extending far beyond the airport's jurisdiction. Seconds passed, each one heavier than the last, as Marcus maintained his steady composure, the embodiment of controlled discipline, while the officers began to sense an unfamiliar pressure building from beyond their immediate environment, signaling that their assumptions about the limits of the situation were about to be fundamentally challenged. As the secure line connected, Marcus Hale felt a ripple of tension release around him, his posture steady, conveying the authority and calm that had been cultivated through years of disciplined service, while Officer Whitmore and the surrounding security staff began to notice the shift in control, realizing the situation had escalated far beyond their standard procedures. The ambient noise of the airport, previously a low hum of movement and distant announcements, seemed to fade into the background as every eye in the terminal focused on the unexpected significance of Marcus's action, with passengers sensing that a critical moment had arrived, some holding their phones as if instinctively documenting the extraordinary sequence unfolding in real time. Marcus's hand moved with deliberate precision, pressing additional keys to ensure the Pentagon received a verified, encrypted communication, and the knowledge of what he was capable of doing, a subtle yet powerful display of his expertise began to radiate outward, prompting even experienced law enforcement personnel to reconsider their assumptions about authority, protocol, and the limits of individual power within the airport environment. Whitmore's attempts at verbal control grew quieter, less confident, as he understood that Marcus's phone call was not merely informational, but a procedural intervention with consequences that could reverberate through multiple chains of command, leaving him momentarily powerless to alter the course that Marcus had initiated, highlighting the contrast between procedural authority and real operational influence. Marcus's expression remained neutral yet focused, eyes scanning the terminal intermittently, acknowledging the curious stares from travelers and the uncertain glances of officers, all while maintaining the disciplined rhythm that allowed him to communicate with precision, timing, and intentionality, effectively commanding attention without physical demonstration, relying entirely on procedural and authoritative knowledge to assert his influence. The surrounding security personnel, caught between routine protocol and the unfolding demonstration of higher-level command, began to adjust their postures, some moving to clear space, others simply observing, recognizing that Marcus's presence and actions embodied a convergence of operational skill and strategic foresight, creating a quiet but profound recalibration of authority within the airport space. As seconds stretched, the anticipation of what the Pentagon's response might entail created a palpable tension, each individual present sensing that the event was no longer under local control, and that Marcus's intervention represented a unique intersection of preparation, capability, and timely execution, redefining the boundaries of influence and demonstrating that mastery of procedure and strategic foresight could dramatically reshape the context of a seemingly routine arrest scenario. Passengers whispered, officers adjusted, and Marcus maintained perfect composure, illustrating the principle that influence often operates silently yet powerfully when expertise and authority intersect. And as the call continued to transmit, the terminal itself seemed to hold its breath, capturing the weight and impact of Marcus's decisive, controlled, and extraordinary intervention within an environment previously dominated by standard operational assumptions. As the encrypted phone connection stabilized, Marcus Hale remained completely composed, his expression unchanged while the situation around him began to shift in ways that were not immediately visible but deeply structural. As Officer Whitmore and the surrounding airport security personnel sensed an unfamiliar escalation in the chain of authority beyond their jurisdiction, the terminal, once filled with routine movement and ambient airport noise, now felt compressed into a focused pocket of tension centered entirely around Marcus and the ongoing secure communication, while passengers nearby observed in growing silence, their attention fixed on the man in handcuffs who did not display fear, frustration, or urgency, but instead maintained a disciplined calm that suggested complete awareness of what was unfolding beyond the visible environment. Whitmore attempted to maintain procedural stability, speaking quietly into his radio and requesting confirmation from higher airport command, yet his tone carried hesitation, as if he no longer fully trusted the scope of control he believed he held. And that subtle erosion of confidence became increasingly noticeable to those standing nearby. Marcus, meanwhile, remained steady, his focus divided between the secure call and the surrounding environment, scanning with controlled awareness, his posture relaxed yet precise, embodying a form of trained stillness that communicated readiness without aggression, and that very stillness began to influence the behavior of others, causing officers to adjust their stance and reduce unnecessary movement as uncertainty replaced routine authority. The presence of escalating external communication channels became evident as Whitmore's radio began receiving rapid responses from supervisory levels. Though the content of those exchanges was not fully audible, their urgency reflected in body language and shifting positions of the officers involved, signaling that Marcus's phone call had reached far beyond the airport's immediate command structure. Passengers who had initially watched with curiosity now stood in quiet anticipation, some lowering their phones as they sensed the gravity of what was unfolding, while others continued recording, recognizing that they were witnessing a rare procedural intersection between civilian enforcement and military-level communication protocols. Marcus's face remained composed, his breathing steady, as he listened intently to the secure line, offering minimal verbal responses that suggested clarity and precision in communication, reinforcing the perception that he was operating within a framework far beyond standard civilian authority. Whitmore, now visibly less certain, exchanged brief words with a senior supervisor who had arrived on scene, the supervisor's expression shifting as new information reached him, indicating that Marcus's identity and communication access were being verified at higher levels, creating a ripple effect of reassessment throughout the security structure. The airport environment itself seemed to adapt to the tension, with movement slowing in the immediate area and attention converging on the central interaction, where control was no longer determined by physical presence alone, but by the flow of verified authority through secure channels. Marcus remained the still center of this unfolding system-wide response, his calm demeanor underscoring the difference between perceived authority and actual operational capability. as each passing second brought further confirmation that the situation had escalated into a level of command verification that none of the on-site officers were fully prepared to manage. The moment the secure communication stabilized, a subtle but unmistakable shift occurred in the airport checkpoint atmosphere as Marcus Hale remained seated in absolute composure, his expression unchanged while the ripple effects of his encrypted call began to extend far beyond the immediate terminal space. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood rigidly near the secondary security barrier, his posture attempting to project control, yet the tension in his shoulders and the brief pauses between his radio transmissions revealed that his authority was no longer operating in isolation, as information now flowed from higher command structures that were reacting to Marcus's identity verification in real time. The surrounding officers, once confident in procedural certainty, now moved with cautious hesitation, exchanging brief glances and adjusting positions as they received fragmented updates that contradicted their initial assumptions about the detainee in front of them, while Marcus remained entirely still, his calm presence acting as a stabilizing center in an environment rapidly losing its original balance. Passengers in the terminal had shifted from casual observation to focused silence, many lowering their devices slightly as they sensed the escalation was no longer local but systemic, the kind of unfolding event that carried consequences beyond what was immediately visible. Whitmore's attempts to maintain procedural framing weakened further as a senior airport supervisor received updated clearance notifications on a handheld device, his expression tightening as he read and reread the information, then looking directly at Marcus with a new level of recognition that replaced earlier skepticism. Marcus did not speak, nor did he need to, as his stillness and controlled posture reflected a level of authority that was now being externally validated through secure military and federal channels, and the officers surrounding him began to understand, gradually and uneasily, that they were no longer dealing with an ordinary passenger situation but with a classified operational identity that had been misinterpreted at the ground level. The atmosphere within the checkpoint shifted from enforcement-driven urgency to careful recalibration, as instructions from higher authority filtered down in short, precise communications that prompted immediate changes in posture and engagement rules among the officers present. Whitmore, now visibly constrained by incoming directives, lowered his voice as he spoke to his team, signaling a transition from assertive control to procedural compliance under external command oversight, while Marcus remained seated, unflinching, his eyes occasionally scanning the environment with the same measured awareness that had characterized him from the beginning, confirming that he was not reacting emotionally but executing a controlled sequence within a broader operational framework. The tension in the terminal did not dissipate but transformed, becoming a structured anticipation of formal resolution, as every observer present sensed that the situation had crossed a threshold where local authority was no longer the deciding factor, and Marcus Hale's presence had become the focal point of a much larger institutional response now unfolding in real time. As the initial tension settled, Marcus Hale remained poised in the center of the airport checkpoint, his posture measured, eyes scanning the environment with the precision of a trained operative, fully aware that each subtle movement he made could influence the rapidly evolving chain of responses from the surrounding officers. Officer Daniel Whitmore now moved with deliberate caution, following a revised protocol dictated by the higher command that had just verified Marcus's credentials, his earlier confidence replaced by careful observation and a constant adjustment of distance and attention, as if he were navigating through a situation that demanded recognition of authority far beyond his immediate jurisdiction. Passengers who had been onlookers moments ago now shifted uneasily, sensing that the routine airport procedures had transformed into a dynamic scenario with national implications. Their whispers subdued, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene as Marcus's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the uncertainty surrounding him. The terminal's digital displays and security alerts began flickering with messages that reinforced the gravity of Marcus's presence, and his knowledge that every action and glance was being monitored in real time ensured that his behavior remained composed, deliberate, and entirely predictable within the framework of operational command. Whitmore's attempts to assert control were carefully moderated by the new information flowing through his communication devices, instructing him to maintain a procedural stance without overstepping authority, while Marcus's facial expressions remained neutral, conveying confidence and strategic patience, sending subtle signals to both subordinates and superiors that the situation was under controlled observation. The interaction between Marcus and the security team evolved into a precise choreography of recognition and compliance, where gestures, positioning, and brief verbal exchanges reflected a synchronization with protocol that balanced safety, legality, and operational integrity, leaving no room for misinterpretation or escalation. Surrounding officers adjusted positions and maintained heightened situational awareness, their eyes continuously monitoring Marcus while responding to incremental updates from command channels, a real-time demonstration of operational discipline in a complex environment, demonstrating how a single verified identity could shift the procedural flow of an entire checkpoint. Marcus remained seated, hands lightly resting on his lap, conveying an unshakable calm that contrasted with the subtle anxiety now present among the officers, whose reactions reflected the consequences of misjudgment and the importance of accurate identification, while passengers slowly resumed their movements, guided by officers now acting in measured alignment with the corrected protocol. The atmosphere retained its charged anticipation, yet there was a clear structure emerging as Marcus's presence and the verified orders from higher authority dictated the pace and flow of activity, balancing the procedural and the extraordinary. Each individual present understood that they were witnessing a transition from routine enforcement to coordinated operational management, and Marcus's composure, strategic awareness, and silent authority anchored the scene, allowing every movement, every glance, and every procedural adjustment to unfold in a controlled, predictable, and professionally disciplined manner, reflecting a high-level orchestration of response and recognition. As the airport terminal gradually returned to its usual rhythm, Marcus Hale walked with unyielding composure, every step deliberate and measured, his uniform impeccably aligned and his demeanor radiating the authority of someone fully aware of the weight of his position, while Officer Daniel Whitmore trailed at a respectful distance, his earlier hesitations replaced by a disciplined awareness of the chain of command, and the necessity to maintain decorum as Marcus's presence alone had reshaped the procedural dynamics of the entire terminal. Passengers and staff alike adjusted their movements subtly, recognizing the transition from uncertainty to structured control, their eyes occasionally meeting Marcus's calm gaze, sensing an unspoken reassurance and the presence of operational clarity that had restored balance after the earlier confusion, and the background hum of announcements, rolling luggage, and distant conversations blended into a controlled ambience that allowed all actions to unfold predictably within the new framework dictated by verified authority. Marcus paused momentarily by the security desk, interacting with the lead officer through concise, measured gestures and clear instructions, each word and movement reinforcing the procedural corrections already communicated from higher command, demonstrating the importance of protocol and the smooth integration of real-time intelligence, while Whitmore observed, silently noting the precision with which Marcus conveyed authority without unnecessary elaboration, and the staff adjusted their positions and attentiveness accordingly, maintaining a consistent awareness of both Marcus's instructions and the overarching operational requirements. As the scene progressed, security checks resumed with enhanced efficiency, guided by Marcus's presence, each passenger moving with a sense of reassured compliance, while Whitmore ensured that every adjustment, every question, and every verification aligned with Marcus's implicit expectations, maintaining a seamless flow of activity that balanced normalcy with the extraordinary influence of an authoritative figure, whose credentials and strategic awareness commanded immediate respect. Digital displays and information panels subtly reinforced the changes in procedural priorities, the information feeds providing real-time updates to staff and officers who remained alert to both passenger needs and protocol requirements, creating a synchronized environment where operational discipline, situational awareness, and procedural accuracy converged. Marcus's calm demeanor acted as the fulcrum around which all movement, all attention, and all minor adjustments revolved, ensuring no missteps occurred while simultaneously conveying confidence and authority that influenced the perception of every observer. As the last of the temporary crowding dissipated, the terminal settled into a controlled, predictable rhythm, Marcus's presence having established a standard of conduct and awareness that persisted well beyond his immediate actions, while Whitmore and the supporting officers maintained structured vigilance, ensuring compliance, efficiency, and clarity throughout, reinforcing the balance between authority, order, and situational responsiveness that defined the conclusion of this intense operational sequence.